Hello, Max. I haven't done the dance in quite a while, so I had to.
You're excited for this guest.
I am really
tell.
excited. To be fair, I'm excited about all of our guests.
Normally,
Also,
she's sternly faced as a guest, as we introduce a guest, like, oh my God, who is this? But this time she's pumped.
That's not true. That is not true. Anyway, before we start talking about our guests, I'm going to ask you actually, like, it's peak, event season. Are you going to any events that you want to mention?
Absolutely. So I will be in New York in March 20th for ASGTG. I am very excited to be speaking there. And I will be, including a code, which is, I believe, Max Sinclair 20, but we'll link it in the notes. So please, listeners.
May or may not be.
Yeah, I think it is. I just can't remember. But yeah, listeners, please come. Would love to, meet in person. Very excited to be, talking about lots of the themes we talk about on this podcast every week on stage. So yeah, hopefully see you there.
Awesome. Well, I'm not coming, but I wish I was. I'm sure
any events in the event season that you're going to be attending, Jo?
Yeah. So actually, in 2 weeks, I'm going to Prague for the European Seller Conference, where I'm doing a workshop, and I'm really excited about that. I am full-blown Rufus through my ears. So if somebody is really interested in how to optimize for Rufus, which you should be, do check it out. But anyway, no more shameless self-promo. Let's introduce our guest. Are you ready, Max?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. So this is someone who has been in this space for quite a while. He's a veteran e-commerce strategist with more than 17 years of experience in the area. What is amazing is that he's managed to sell more than 3.5 billion, that is a B, in brand sales on Amazon. He is the co-founder and chief product officer at DeepM AI, and he helps brands and agencies leverage big data and machine learning to understand what is under the hood of the Amazon algorithm. So without further ado, drum roll please, it's Brian R. Johnson.
Welcome.
Hi, Brian.
Thanks for having me. You guys are hilarious. Your opening antics are funny. I was just cracking up backstage. So
yeah, we try to keep it casual and fun, and no zzz, sleepy listeners.
You got to work on your drum roll though.
I will bring in next time a proper drum. So we like to dive deep right from the start. So the first conversation we ever had, me and you, Brian, was a total geek out, and I was like, okay, we need to stop talking because there's so much material that we should discuss on the podcast. And basically a lot of what we talked about was organic ranking and essentially organic ranking factors.
Yeah.
And this is a hot topic that has been hot forever for all Amazon sellers. So what are, in your opinion, the main organic ranking factors on Amazon in 2025?
Well, certainly organic ranking is something that always has been desirable for brands selling on Amazon. There's a lot of kind of vague implications that you run ads and you can organically rank magically, or optimizing the title, or just selling a bunch of units is really all the only thing you can do as far as like ranking organically. And some of that stuff, to be quite honest, just out of being naive is what I spouted for years. I was primarily focused on sponsored ads, but we used organic ranking as kind of a side story, not as a focus of attention. For me now, it's definitely a focus of attention because I went out and I knew that more data would help me, not just a little more data, but a lot, like a ton more data. And so these days, we're pulling in we're analyzing probably about 30 to 40 million data points in some product niches, just at a product niche level. We're talking like, 500-600 search terms, 300, products deep kind of product niche. 20, 30, 40 million data points. It keeps on growing because we keep on adding on more data. That gives us a big enough picture that we can identify what you mentioned, the search rank factors is what I call them. And these are the elements that influence the A9 algorithm in order to sort the products that are sold for each search term on Amazon. So generally what we find is there's a few that bubble to the top. Now, I used to say it's like, oh, there's, 20, 30 search rank factors. And then we say, oh, now there's over 40. It's like, well, now we're at over 100. So the more data we collect, the more dots that we connect, we actually find more and more. Now, some of these are going to have diminishing returns where it's like, well, this only affects the organic ranking algorithm, 1%. And therefore only under extreme circumstances, you're going to have, you're going to want to optimize that 1% thing in order to beat out competitors. But that said, is with over 100 different search rank factors we've identified, there's some that bubble up to the top. Some common ones, nobody's going to be surprised by the list here. Title usually comes in anywhere from probably about a 12%. I've seen as high as a 35% weight on A9. And it varies from category to category. It varies from product niche to product niche. And so the one size fits all concept of how A9 sorts products, I used to think it was a one size fits all. Most people did. We've since learned it's like that's absolutely not true. Amazon A9 takes a different viewpoint on every single product niche, and we learned that, okay, it makes sense after a while as far as like why those things happen. But the original question, title, generally 2 content fields, title and bullet points, usually have at least a 10% weight on A9. Unit velocity, we break it down to what has happened recently. 30-day unit velocity is most common on products that have a higher turnover, like subscribe and save type of products. If it's more of a luxury item that has a higher price point, then they're going to look at things like 90-day or 180-day unit velocity. And so where they want consistency over time in one niche, but on something that's a commodity or something that is a easily promoted through coupons and lightning deals and these kind of things, or is a consumable like a subscribe and save, they generally want, what did you do for me lately? In order the last 30 days kind of unit velocity. Some of the other ones that we look at, we bundle these together into like a batch of content rank factors, velocity rank factors, and conversion rank factors. Interestingly enough, most commonly I get asked, it's like, oh, well, price is one of those. It's not. Funny enough, it's not. It's actually, price is one of those that definitely affects conversion rate and your relative conversion rate to your competitors, which we look at down at the individual search term level. True. But it is not by itself. The price difference is not usually a big factor. Sometimes it comes up in the top 20, but rarely does it come up in the top 5. Actually, I would say it never comes up in the top 5, but it does come top 10 as far as price. But it definitely hits conversion rate, and of course, conversion rate would be a top 5. And so, so a couple of content fields, certainly the number of units that you're selling, and then from there it splinters out to dozens of different possibilities, and we look at a lot. And so it's interesting to see from niche to niche what pops up on the radar that's unique that we can actually leverage, that there's no way the brand ever would have seen that without some deep data analysis in order to get to it.
So to summarize what you're saying, you believe there's 3 buckets of ranking on A9, which is content, velocity, and conversion. Is that fair?
Correct. I mean, I could add on a 4th, just kind of like a catch-all for a bunch of other things. I try to pin it down for simplicity's sake. I try to pin it down to those three of content, conversion, velocity. Usually where content and velocity usually trade places as far as which one's dominant. Like content may have, you know, a 50% impact on A9 in one niche, and it has a 20% impact on A9 if you bundle those all together.
That makes sense. And I think when talking about, and it's funny talking about A9 because I don't know about you, Joe, I feel like people have kind of stopped talking a little bit about A9. I'm sure we'll get on to discussing that. But so just taking this as, you know, in A9, I guess in your velocity one, you're looking at stock availability, fulfillment, all this kind of stuff. Is that bundled into
That's
there?
also true.
So my question to you is, have you seen anything that surprised you, or, you know, surprised the brands that you're working with, as something that is non-obvious that you wouldn't have expected to be a ranking factor that you now believe is a ranking factor?
Yes, but you know, after some thought about, like, once I see it the first time, I'm like, wait, what? That can't be right. But then when you start thinking about it, an example on that is some of the badges that get thrown out, right? So some of the badges that come up frequently, like small business badge, for instance. I didn't know, you know, like, well, wait a minute, why is small business badge coming up on this particular product? And then I didn't even know what the criteria was for it. So I'd go in and I'd research it, and I'd see where, like, oh, that is US based companies that have less than a certain number of headcount, but they're US based, right? And so they can get the small business badge. And in certain categories or certain product niches, that stands out as whether or not there's more American manufacturing, more US companies that are promoting that product versus, like, say, Chinese companies, as an example. And therefore, the ones that are bubbling to the top are the ones that maybe have this small business badge. I never even considered it. I wasn't actually even aware that was a badge until it came up on the radar of one of the profiles. And I was like, wait, what is this one? I haven't seen that before. The ones that surprise us sometimes is where a product niche, where those who rank for more search terms across an entire niche, they tend to bubble to the top. And that's part of how we, you know, when we're studying the patterns to determine how A9 is making choices and how much of a weight they put on each of it, how much does it influence A9. Every once in a while, we'll see something that comes up like, you know, 1 to 5%, pretty low on the scale as far as impact. But things like, you know, we'll see every once in a while where Amazon is paying attention to whether or not you're selling multi-channel, like off Amazon. You're selling on Walmart, you're selling on eBay, you know, that type of thing. And it'll actually measure that. Now, we've got a lot of different data sources. So it's only, you know, our observations are only as good as those data sources. And if those data sources, you know, we try to get the best quality we can, but, you know, you're not going to have a perfect system. Otherwise, I'd be on the inside of Amazon, you know, looking at the algorithm itself rather than trying to get a clear perspective on it from outside. But most of the predictions we make on it, most of the observations come true as far as, like, how do we go through and actually optimize and beat out competitors in that niche by optimizing those individual rank factors. So we continue to test it again and again for 2 years now.
Yeah. And actually, like, you talked about selling on other marketplaces, like Walmart, etc. That led me to something that I talk with a lot of sellers, a lot of other people in the space. You know, I guess the theory or the observation or the experience that external traffic has a really big implication on, like, ranking. Have you seen that as well? And have you seen any particular traffic type, like whether it's like influencer, TikTok, Google, blah blah blah, have over indexes over other channels?
Yeah, we can speculate as far as, like, how that affects the individual unit velocity, because we measure unit velocity. There's about there's probably like 9 or 10 different rank factors that involve unit velocity or order velocity in different positions and different ways of reading that same thing. So usually what we see is on those where you've got external traffic, we don't see the specific traffic, where the traffic came from. But we know in working with partners, working with other services, working with client brands, that, you know, it's like, oh, we ran this kind of promotion through a TikTok influencer, or we did a search, find, buy rebate, you know. So we can see where some of these things, where we know where that traffic is coming from. And so then we can read it and see. But we only know that because of the inside information we have with whoever we're working with. We're not going to have that for every single brand and product that's sold in that same niche. However, that is an area that we will continue to develop. We've got several areas that we look forward to developing as part of our roadmap, and that is to be more aware of cross-channel traffic, search, where the audience is, multi-channel. We built it in a way that it doesn't just apply to Amazon, but at some point we'll have it built out so that we can kind of have our listeners, have our probes, and have our listening devices across multiple channels, so that we can see where the audience is on certain search terms, as well as maybe where some of the traffic is flowing back and forth, where it's trending. It's speculative, I will say. I don't want to just like make something up here. It's speculative to say traffic from TikTok has a bigger influence on A9, you know, on organic ranking on Amazon than, like, say, coming through Facebook or Walmart or something like that, right? It may, depending on whatever Amazon wants to say. Hey, we appreciate that traffic more coming from TikTok than coming from Facebook, let's say. But it's really speculative until somebody gets a hold of the inside data.
Fair enough. We just had a really interesting pod last week with Alexander Swade, who was the ex-director of paid for Thrasio. So he had like an overview of hundreds of brands across loads of markets. And we had an interesting chat. So like for our listeners, if you want to actually listen a little bit about external traffic and how that has affected it, check out our last episode.
Yeah, I definitely encourage it, because certainly, you know, I work with like one of the services that I work with, they do a great job as far as the search, find, buy rebate, which a lot of brands like, oh no, you can't do that anymore. It's like, yeah, you absolutely can. You just have to do it correctly. You have to do it safely. You have to air gap between Amazon or however you're doing it. But it is way more effective to run that kind of a promotion, you know, as far as giving away, you know, a set number of units in 10 days or so, or 2 weeks, than running ads, especially like, say, if you're in a category that has a really high CPC, like pet category is ridiculous. Then it makes a lot more sense. It's like, okay, I can run ads and I can influence the unit sales velocity through through sponsored ads across the next 4 months, and it'll get me there. But it may cost me 20 grand in order to get there. Now, is the payoff for organic sales that come with that worth it? Yes. But why wouldn't I just go and spend, you know, $5,000 on, you know, to punch it up in the first 2 weeks rather than waiting for 4 months to realize the benefit, right? As long as the other search rank factors are optimized prior to that type of a spike, whether that is a giveaway, an influencer, you know, promotion, lightning deal, coupon, any of that kind of stuff. Those only work as long as those are running, unless a brand also optimizes the other search rank factors that matter to A9. And that's part of the advantage that we provide for our clients, is giving that visibility of what actually matters to A9 and what your precise relative position is to your competitors on each one of those. So, you know, well, do I have just 1% more of optimization in order to to leapfrog my next competitor? Or is it like a 20% and don't bother for now, I'll come back to it later? That's, you know, that's a real thing.
So I want to ask what listeners are probably thinking, which
It begs a lot of questions, doesn't
two,
it?
well, there's two big elephants in the room here.
Yep.
So the first one, how do you think Cosmo has impacted A9?
So great one. So with Cosmo, that is an area that we are testing in our labs. Imagine big, clinical warehouse. No, okay. We're testing it on the back end as far as primarily the aspect of Cosmo as far as the image to text translation and what that does as far as influencing A9. We see some initial findings that primarily have to do with the image that you think that you're showing, whether it's primary, secondary, A+, that you think that you're showing to your audience and to the algorithm may see it differently than what you think it is. I think there's an example, I forget now who mentioned that. There's so many smart people in this space that I have a high respect for in this area that are studying these. And I think one of those examples was something like there's a lifestyle image. I can use one of my own on this one. And that is a brand that was selling outdoor accessories like, the cheese board, like the charcuterie boards. And they were showing, the lifestyle image of the charcuterie board. And then, there's a group of happy people, drinking wine and enjoying the charcuterie board and having a great social time. And if you run that through various image to text translation, and presumably how Cosmos or some of Amazon's other image to text translation tools would run, is it comes back in and says like, oh, okay, happy smiling people getting drunk. Like, oh, hold on, that's not what I'm going for here. That's not the message. And in fact, we've actually had product listings in previous years, even prior to Cosmo, that were flagged as promoting alcohol consumption because of that. Where like there's a wine glass sitting on the table next to the actual product, and that was promoting alcohol consumption. And so sometimes you've got to go in, especially the fast ability to create images through, the AI tools. You could iterate and split test a bunch of different images and test those. You could use a language model. You could use Amazon recognition. You could use, there's a number of methods that you could put it in there and just to see like, okay, let me do a Rufus search and see what comes back, So there's a number of different ways to try to evaluate how Amazon may be looking at each of your images and your content as a whole, relative to what probably is the intent of the shopper, and whether those are all in alignment, or if you're introducing noise, I guess is kind of where I'm getting with this. Is you can introduce noise that will distract A9, that will distract your customer in any of the content, image, video, text. All of that, I think, is going to get more and more precise as far as, am I directing into my target audience with the correct language that appeases both my consumer as well as the algorithm? Because I think it's going to be affected by any of, certainly Cosmos.
So if I can just ask a follow-up. So I agree with you. One of the big changes that has happened is understand, the AI, generative AI has become multimodal. It can understand images. As you may remember, Brian, I worked at Amazon. So one of the big challenges we faced at Amazon when I was there was sellers will be using keywords. For example, I'm wearing a blue V-neck, but they would be using stuff in keywords: white V-neck, gray V-neck, yellow V-neck.
Yeah. And
therefore, when you search the algorithm actually wasn't smart enough to give products like the right color back, right? You get all sorts of junk back. You get you put in a color, and this is 2022, 2021, that kind of that kind of stage. You'd get all sorts of color back because without the technology didn't really exist apart from in the labs of like OpenAI and wherever else to actually like decipher what was inside the image, which they now definitely have, as you say, and it's it's definitely a big factor. But the other big thing about Cosmo, from what we've seen, and it's really kind of the thesis behind Ecomten is like they've suddenly stuck a large language model in this search algorithm, right? And anyone who's used trained in a large language model, or even people who've used ChatGPT, will know it's an absolute wild beast, right? It is a black box in the sense that even the top scientists at OpenAI don't really understand how the relations between what it outputs and what they come in, because there's just billions and billions and billions of different computations, which is obviously why they call it the large part of large language model. So therefore, you've kind of thrown in literally a Berlin to the China shop of all these beautiful A9 ranking factors, and like what have in your view, what have you seen with that side of it?
You're saying as far as like how the language models would look at this, or
I'm saying that you had A9, which didn't have a large language model in it until 2022 or whatever, because no one was using large language models, and then now you have one which does have large language models. So they are brilliant at, as everyone knows about Cosmo, blah blah blah. It's great at understanding intent. It's great at understanding context. They as Ela, who is the ex-CTO of OpenAI, says they have like a mini map of the world in their knowledge, right? They suck in all the information of the world, increasingly text, image, everything, video, and that's how they build their knowledge. They have as Cosmo says, it's a common sense knowledge in the algorithm, but that is a huge change in my opinion. But what's your opinion?
I mean, I agree. I think it's, theoretically it should create a better experience, especially if it's a conversational search for the consumer, from how A9 treats it. As far as, obviously with our focus as far as the organic ranking and what, how A9 treats it is, yes, we acknowledge that there's going to be some integration with some of the newer tools, but a lot of what we're doing is brute force observation, where we're just collecting so much data every single week that we can simply just visually, observe what the changes are based off of, what happened that particular week. And we can see where, okay, there's about 80% of A9 that we can influence, and we know precisely where to place that. Now, certainly like at Amazon Accelerate, for instance, they were talking about, having dynamic titles in the search results based off of customer, intent, about shopper intent. And that certainly is going to, I don't want to say mess it up. I think it's just a new observation point, because like we collect enough data where we can see where where a brand is split testing a title using Amazon Experiments, for instance. And so we know that they're split testing a title, and we know what they finally settle in on, and we can analyze, okay, what do they actually commit to, when they're done with that, when that test. It's going to be about how many different places that we're listening. And I think that's an area that we can certainly expand, like any type of observation post, whether it is keyword ranking, rank position, or, like keyword tracking, or data consumption, on scraping or pulling reports. It's only going to be as good as like how much diversity do you have as far as your observations to be able to catch some of these differences and these anomalies and try to adjust for it. But I would say that the nice thing about this is it doesn't just affect, our client. It affects everybody who's in that product niche, and so everybody has, it's almost like leveling the playing field, because everybody's disrupted because of things like dynamic content goes, as far as search results that might change based off of subsequent questions that a shopper may make through Rufus, right? I think it certainly makes it more difficult to analyze, but I'm also confident that we'll be able to adapt to that better than better than most.
Fair enough. And actually, we haven't talked about Rufus, and everyone's talking about Rufus now. And, it's kind of connected to absolutely everything we talked about. And it is a completely different way for customers to search for products. What we talked about and what you mentioned at the start in terms of the ranking factors that you're looking at, they are like quite connected to on a keyword level, as you mentioned. And I guess what I'm really interested in hearing is how do you see everything shifting from tracking everything from a keyword point of view of the success of a keyword to a world where we have conversations and that is how the sales are happening and it's not about keyword anymore. I mean, at the moment, still predominantly most people shop by using keywords, but the more and more Rufus grows, I think that would become sort of a completely new paradigm of that process.
Yeah, Rufus is just stage one.
Mm.
There'll be a day when somebody comes on to the Amazon app, for instance, and they're literally having a virtual conversation with an AI personality that you just say like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. It's like, well, what else? There's some things that, certain aspects of this kind of product. Are you looking for a certain price point or you're having this kind of interactive interview in order to help, make a curated recommendation, to you, where you're just having a conversation with that search. Now, that doesn't work in all cases because some people don't want to be having a phone conversation when they're on the, the New York train. They want to just text or whatever. But I don't see any reason why that wouldn't develop to the point where it's almost like a concierge type of personal shopper who understands your history, that understands your preferences, has learned from your preferences, knows your sizes, knows what kind of vehicle you drive, how big your household is, that kind of stuff. A little too much information, right? And be able to make very personalized, recommendations. And by extension, it doesn't have to stay on Amazon. You could have, a third party app that does that. It wouldn't have as much information that Amazon would have about your buying behavior, but it could come in, you got some of these, you got a browser, it's like, oh, well, here's, you can get a better price on this other site. It's like, well, yeah, but if you have like, say, a full video AI concierge that goes through and says like, well, you can actually get the same product over here for this one, but it's going to take you a couple extra days. Is that okay? It's going to advance more than what we see right now. Right now, we're trying to wrap around our head with I think, frankly, Amazon is too, trying to wrap around their head as far as like, how do we roll this out? How do we implement it? And by the time we get our head wrapped around it, somebody's going to introduce a new level, and everybody's going to like jump up to that new level.
I couldn't agree more. I think what we are seeing now is the experimentation.
Yep.
Does it go in the search bar? Does it go under the images? Does it go under the A+ content? If you look on Amazon, if you just spend any time on Amazon, you'll see Rufus has like multiple different places for different products and different users, and it's a period of split testing. But it's for sure the future, and I completely agree with you. At some point, it's going to be a personalized shopping assistant. And that is, the world is moving. So I think you touched on it. The last big one, maybe the smaller elephant in the room after Cosmo and Rufus, would be the dynamic titles and the personalization. Do you want to reflect on that and how that's going to change organic ranking?
Well, I mean, the dynamic titles are certainly going to be, you already have dynamic sorting that occurs already. Look at geo ranking as an example of that. Dynamic title, geo ranking, for those who aren't as familiar with that, is if you have your product in, if your product is only in 3 Amazon warehouses, then when shoppers search that are in proximity, that are relatively close within 1 or 2 business shipping days of the warehouse where you have your product, then your product is going to rank higher in search simply because of proximity between the inventory location and where the consumer wants the product to be sent. And so there's been a lot of great attempts at conducting geo ranking and saying, hey, your inventory is over here, but your customer is not seeing it. You're not ranking well because you don't have inventory in this one specific FBA warehouse. The problem with that is the overhead in order to do that kind of tracking is difficult. It's expensive, and so that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen a great execution on some of these geo ranking type of services. But the dynamic titles is similar to that, where the search results are going to change from consumer to consumer already, and then now you're adding in dynamic titles. How much is Amazon actually going to modify those titles? We certainly saw from part of the reason why we probably haven't seen it roll out, or we haven't seen it when the testing has been pretty thin so far. What we saw at Amazon Accelerate on stage is like, yeah, here's an example of dynamic titles, and they completely violated copyright or IP of some other brand in the dynamic title. They completely screwed up their own demo, right? And it's like, okay, clearly this is not ready. And that's, I don't care if it's Amazon or any company, you're always going to have mistakes like that. And of course, they're always going to be in an opportune time when you're in front of 1,000 people and everybody's recording it. And you're like, oh, you screwed it up,
I was in the, in the Accelerate, they kind of have the rooms afterwards where you can go and they have the product manager and it's like not recorded, not live, but basically they're getting feedback from the customers. So it must have been about 50 to 100 sellers in that room. They were so angry about dynamic titles. Like, there was maybe like 5 or 6 Amazon senior, the guy who announced it and the product manager, she was talking, and like, it was question after question, like, don't do, I don't want this changing. How do I opt out? Blah, 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 like all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they must have read, I hope they must have read the room a bit and be like, oh, wow, we didn't expect people to, because they don't really understand how much work the customers actually, like sellers, go in to optimize. I don't think they really understand that. And they have, being ex-Amazon for 6 years, I think they have the view of like, we're a lot smarter than they are, and we're going to fix all this stuff for them and they're going to love it. And they don't realize that there's this art and a science to what people actually do to get onto Amazon.
Traditionally, I would say that's true. I mean, Accelerate, I was very impressed with the listening ears that occurred at Accelerate, where you had people who were fully qualified on the floor and having that conversation and go, wait, tell me more about that. It's like, what are you talking about? Oh, I haven't heard of that. It's like, how could you not hear about that? That's like one of the biggest pain points in the Amazon, Chatterbox, community. It's like, yeah, we didn't hear about it.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a great event. And
yeah.
I'm talking more from my own personal experience. Maybe that's a reflection on me more than my ex-colleagues. But I think that was certainly the feeling that I had, which is I was there doing this stuff, changing browse notes to people, and I had no idea of the seller community and what people were doing outside of it. But anyway, my question on the Accelerate topic is a also release, which I thought was very interesting, and it kind of disappeared afterwards, was Gen AI unique personalized shopping pages. So you're buying a laptop and they kind of release this with a lot of fanfare, and it's like, oh, actually that makes a lot of sense. The AI will kind of generate a new page of like, these are the key things you need for laptop. You need battery, you need screen size, you need RAM, and it kind of creates a whole new purchasing kind of page.
Yeah.
Not Rufus, not organic. It's an entirely new thing. Have you seen this since, and do you have any thoughts about this one?
I mean, I haven't seen it. It makes perfect sense that they would have some kind of a dynamic thing, where you could literally have a page result. That's kind of like, I don't know if this is similar to like what I was talking about as far as like the video concierge, where you get this custom experience based off of what your search criteria, kind of like you go through a search engine, you're shopping for a car and you got all these different filters. Well, you can just kind of speak out those filters and a lot of times the results on things like if you're shopping for a car, it'll come back and say like, okay, we found 7 results that matched exactly your criteria. Oh, but here's 122 that are not quite what you want, right? And so you get that kind of dynamic flexibility, knowing that people have some flexibility on some choices and very rigid on other choices. It would make sense both from a conversation as well as a custom either custom search results or an actual page that points out like, okay, you wanted this has everything except for this one thing, almost like a comparison. Is that kind of what you envision? Is that type of comparison type of
they announced
page?
it was one of the announcement. Joe, do you remember this? Like they kind of announced this and then
no, I don't remember that. I think it might have been in the sort of like the closed chat rooms that you guys had, like, the closed betas, no? And then I was
anyway, we'll try and link it below.
But it makes a lot of sense, Matt. It makes a lot of sense. In fact, it makes more sense for them to do like, let's say, for instance, back in the old days, a lot of the shopping search engines, it's like, oh, take these 5 products and do a comparison, right? It's like, you don't have that really on Amazon. You've got some of that in the A+ where you can go in and you can say, okay, here's some other alternatives. But to actually have not a search result page, not a product detail page, but a hybrid of those two.
Exactly. That's what
that allows you to filter, and it's pointing out, you've got bold red that says like, this does not meet your criteria that you specified. How, are you really committed to this one, limitation, or are you flexible? Really trying to craft a short set of recommendations based on what you're looking at so that you have a much higher satisfaction. And you're, especially because, whoever does this first is going to have such a crafted shopping experience that people are going to rely on it. Like, it becomes the new standard where it's like, why would I go anywhere else when I can get a very bespoke, very customized search result based off of what I'm currently looking for and what my preferences are and past history are.
Yeah. I think there's this weird trend now in kind of the Valley and by extension, maybe Seattle, where these big companies will announce something which just isn't live and won't be live for like 6 months or a year. And they like OpenAI, Apple will be like, Google, here's our new thing. And it's like, well, no one has it and no one can use it. So maybe it's like just throwing it out there to show,
vaporware
where the stakeholders are. But yeah, Joe, do you want to jump in with a question?
Thanks, Max. Actually, I want to switch a little bit of the topic, which is more around new product launches, because I think it's always an evergreen topic, and I guess it's sort of like a two-way question. Like the first interesting topic to discuss is like, what should brands do in terms of like organically ranking right from the bat when they launch a new product. But the second part of the question is, with everything we just talked about, with like, Rufus coming in, with Amazon changing, how do you predict, or how do you imagine the future of basically having a new brand or having a new product on Amazon? And is that going to be even possible for completely brand new sellers in terms of success?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, primarily because, even with the technology changes that I think we're acknowledging that Amazon is still kind of testing, it's still early. It's they're going to make some mistakes. They're kind of going out for the enhancement on some of these new tools, but they haven't fully committed on it. Now, someday they're going to overstep, and we acknowledge that's probably going to happen. But as far as new product launch, the opportunity primarily is going to be of taking the road less traveled. In other words, picking your battles and really saying like, okay, there are weak points in the Amazon search space. So I can introduce a product and go after a smaller, more focused shopper that is using very specific search terms that are the competitors for that same product are weak on as far as optimization, because they've chosen to all battle it out on these very high search volume. But there's going to be a lot of product opportunity for those. And I'm not just talking about long tail. I'm talking about, you've got both short tail, mid tail, long tail search terms that that a lot of products are simply just not optimized well for. The traditional product listing creation is based off of using things like keyword research tools, which are inherently flawed because they don't have enough data. It looks like they certainly have a lot more data than the brand owner, but they're outdated. As much as they've advanced over the years, I can kill every single one of them. I can outrank anybody for non-branded terms. I want to be careful on that. For a non-branded term, I can show a client how to rank number one for any search term, non-branded search term in their category that they want to. But they may not choose to do that because it's too expensive in order to overcome how well optimized. And optimization could be the number of units that are being sold. It could be either, the title is perfectly optimized for this one search term. But that's part of the reason why we do a mix of like, okay, here's where you're at and here's where you're strong and you're weak against your competitors on these individual, search terms that you're already ranked for and selling for. And then here's a set of new search terms that are opportunities for you you've got a lot of weak competition on these search terms, but they have a lot of organic search and a lot of organic sales value. Now, when you pair that with a new product launch, you can go in and you can do all the niche analysis. You don't have necessarily, if a brand has never sold a product in that particular niche, they're not going to have any existing data of their own to say, here's my relative strength on things like conversion rate, click-through rate on this specific search term for my product. So there's a lot of speculation that would have to occur in using other data to say, look, I'm looking at, say, the top 500 to 600 non-branded search terms for this product niche that I'm looking to get into. And as we would expect, the competition is fierce, and there's a lot of, the top 20 ranked products that dominate, that have a lot of market share. They have done a good job of optimizing their unit velocity, their PPC, their content for those specific search terms well enough that they're consistently getting ranked and they're consistently selling. And therefore, it looks like they're impenetrable. It looks like they're like, say, 800-pound gorilla. I can't go up against them. When in reality, no product can really optimize for too many. And that's kind of an air quote, too many subjective, number. Is the top brands, they may do really well on 20 search terms and fail miserably at 100 other search terms when it comes to optimizing for ranking. So I think that for every product that already exists in a product niche that doesn't rank well, or for any brand that wants to introduce a new product, you could assess that product niche and say, look, here's the strengths and the weaknesses. When I create my product listing on the front end, I can build a product listing faster now than ever, because of the AI tools that are available through the language models, through the AI, image creators, creation tools. And I can iterate through a number of different designs, but ultimately, if I've done my advanced research here and I know where the competitors are strong and where they're weak, I can simply just optimize my product listing and my images, my content for everything that they're weak on that still has good search volume. And I can instantly just rocket up to page 1 on all these search terms without much resistance, simply because the door was left open by most of the competitors in that space.
So we've got 5 minutes of the podcast left, so I think it's only fair that we ask you, what is DeepM.ai? What are you guys building there? I mean, I imagine it's kind of related to everything we'd be discussing, but do you want to go into a bit more details on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely we call it internally, we call it like a brute force data-driven organic ranking approach. And in other words, we collect so much data that we can understand mostly what A9 wants from a product listing, from an offer. in order to rank it higher or lower on organic search. So we can essentially we reverse engineer a majority. I don't want to, say that we've got, everything figured out, because there's very smart minds. You've got like, Danny and Oana, who will go into some of the patents and this kind of stuff. It's fantastic information. It's, to a geek like me to go through and, listen in on other experts in the space that are studying the different angles. We just take a brute force data, big data approach. And so we can see which individual search rank factors, which elements that across a product niche are more important or less important to A9 for that specific product niche. We know if the title optimization needs, if it has a 30% weight versus a 10% weight, that can make a huge difference as far as where do I spend my attention and my efforts and my money to optimize, rather than just shotgun and say, okay, I'm going to buy a $4,000 listing optimization package and hope that it works. I can say, okay, I know that the bullet points have a very high influence on A9. I'm going to spend all my time optimizing for semantics, for keyword density, for position, proximity, relevance, all these things that kind of get baked into the data science of content optimization, along with what kind of unit velocity can I compete on. And at DeepM, we're looking at the individual search term level, so that we can tell you, okay, if you want to go after these specific search, 5 search terms, if you go from, we predict it and say like, okay, you're currently averaging, 10 to 20 as far as your organic search on these 5 terms, and we can show you how to get up to position 1 through 5, right? Or position where you want to go after. Here's how much it's worth once you get there, in organic sales. Here's the cost in order to get there. And then as a business owner, you can make a decision, okay, that's worth the cost. There's good ROI there. And always knowing along that journey, whether it takes weeks or months in order to get there, precisely what do I need to optimize slightly better than my competitors in order to beat them out on multiple search rank factors that's going to have a cumulative effect on A9, and therefore is going to rank my product higher. So we show them the path of least resistance, and if they want to go after the most resistance, we'll tell them exactly what it takes in order to optimize better than their competitors on what matters to A9 for their specific product niche.
Awesome. Well, this was super interesting. And as I wrote in my LinkedIn post, super geeky. So I'm very proud of this episode. Well done, fellow geeks. So if our listeners and our viewers would like to get in touch with you, Brian, how can they do so?
So it looks like it's on the white title underneath my name on the screen there. So deepm.ai. So www.deepm.ai is our site. There's a contact form. Somebody can, obviously reach out. I'm usually on LinkedIn the most, but
aren't we all?
Yeah, I think I'm relatively accessible. You can reach out to me directly, or come out to our site and say, hey, set me up an intro, give me a demo of what this thing is doing, and I'll decide whether it's
Awesome.
it's good for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being our guest. It was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Take care.